Hello, I am Jennifer Malone, and I am a cybersecurity consultant. In a previous presentation, we talked about the threats in 2024 according to Verizon. And we talked about these threats against what I call the red triangle in cyberspace. Now let's continue and discuss what to do about addressing these threats that we already talked about. Let's pick up where we left off in my last presentation. We'll revisit the cyber triangle for a moment. What I've done here is I've parsed out the current top 2024 threats from Verizon's Data Breach Investigation Report, or DBIR, and I parse that out to the appropriate areas in the cyber red triangle. Sure, there's some overlap and some repeats, but that's okay. This helps to organize the findings and start a plan of attack. It's a good solid foundation to have, even when the threats change. Let's talk about some ideas to address the threats we talked about earlier. We'll start with securing the center of the cyber red triangle, the human target. Cybersecurity awareness training. I know. We don't have to like it, we just have to do it. Be sure to include business email compromise, or BEC, as well as phishing in the training. Pardon me as I go off on a little tangent here. So I assess that most people by now, they know not to click on the phishing links. They know how to discern the difference between a real phishing link and a real email. They've been trained well enough. However, it's also about maintaining the right mindset. You see, we're swimming in hundreds of emails every day and night. And it doesn't matter if it's at home or work, with our home and work email accounts, or on our phone or on our computers. We multitask like there's no tomorrow. Most emails are benign, but we can get fatigued and become more complacent and trusting. It's akin to physical security and safety. So let's say if you're transiting a densely populated, crime-ridden urban area on foot, it's sensory overload. Your head needs to be on a swivel, and you need to remain alert and maintain situational awareness. This is not the time to be staring at your phone, listening to music, or reading a book. But guess what? This heightened state can be mentally exhausting and hard to maintain for long periods of times at one stretch. It's even worse if you're overseas, especially in a combat zone. Lose your alertness mindset for just a few seconds, and then possibly, boom. So I surmise that people are more likely to click on a phishing email when they're distracted by hundreds of other emails or other people or a personal or professional problem, fatigue, illness, or other human condition, whether it's work-related or not. Processes for errors. At the same time, it helps to have processes in place for the use of bank accounts or financial transactions and other high-risk activities that involve high-profile positions and their assistants. It might not be a good idea to rely on email alone for high-risk activities like wiring funds, for example. It helps to have policies, processes, and procedures to reduce the probability of human errors in general, especially in IT and security. Incident response, or IR, processes are very important when breaches occur. You got to use them. And recovery procedures are crucial as well. You need to be ready for ransomware, extortion, and other scenarios. Put your IR documents and playbooks to the test with an IR tabletop exercise. Get this all done proactively so you'll be ready and you'll feel more confident for when something bad does happen. Identity, credentials, multi-factor authentication. Having MFA in place reduces the probability of credential theft and thus email account takeover. Use MFA everywhere, especially for administrator privilege actions. Start there and give it to everybody else. Consider using hardware tokens, especially FIDO2. That's Fast Identity Online 2 tokens. Follow your identity and MFA product vendors' best practices and guidance on making your implementations, quote, phishing resistant, unquote. What's that? Phishing resistant authentication prevents sensitive authentication data from going to fake applications or website. So that helps to have that. If you really want to kick things up a notch, consider using adaptive authentication. It takes into account multiple MFA methods and contexts like locations and risk. For example, let's say you have a database administrator accessing the Crown Jewels database server from a different location than where they would normally log in from. And that may subject them to an additional factor for their authentication. Or maybe the database admin would be denied access when logging in from a foreign country shortly thereafter logging in from the normal location in the US due to impossible travel. Weigh the differences between step-up authentication, which is more static than the more dynamic adaptive authentication, and take it from there. Now let's talk about securing vertex number 1 of the cyber red triangle, which is email. Email security can help mitigate phishing emails. Consider a phased approach to locking email down. So start with securing the email in general. Harden the server, patch it when needed, and consider using certificates and encryption in the email. This way you can sign and the recipient knows it's you and not a malicious person. And of course, with encryption, the content is protected and only the recipient can read it. Secure email gateways can detect email threats and anti-spam. Most organizations have that already. That's great, but don't just stop there. Upgrade the email solution to include things like machine learning to identify the high-risk users and detect things like email account takeovers. Next, work on authentication. Implement DMARC. And that way, it can ensure the email is authenticating against DKIM and SPF standards. So DMARC makes the header from domain trustworthy, and the email domain owner can publish a DMARC record in the DNS and create a policy to tell receivers what to do with emails that fail the authentication. So if fraudsters spoof your email domain, the email can be blocked, which will help with the business email compromise threat. Response. Consider an email feature where malicious emails can be detected and analyzed. The malicious messages can be automatically removed to help automate the email cleanup process, which is very handy. Finally, consider using a managed service for email security. There's a lot going on with email infrastructure, phishing, and other threats that we've discussed. And particular, DMARC can be a challenge, and a managed service can certainly help there too. Now let's talk about securing vertex 2 of the cyber red triangle, which is the internet. Just about everything is on the web these days. Users are going everywhere, from the endpoints. They're accessing business SaaS applications, IaaS providers, and searching for information to help them with their jobs. Like it or not, they're accessing the web for personal reasons too. So what do we do to protect these organizations from the web threat vector? Enter the Gartner terms like Secure Access Service Edge or SASE and Security Services Edge or SSE. There's a lot going on here. SASE is a combination of identity and access management, or IAM, firewall as a service, secure web gateway, virtual private network, or zero trust network access, cloud access security broker, CASB, and software-defined wide area network, SD-WAN. Nowadays, the term Security Services Edge, SSE, is used by Gartner. It separates the security from the networking. So, SSE is the same as SASE, except you remove the SD-WAN part. And that's just what we'll do today, because SD-WAN is another project most likely spearheaded by the network team, but should still involve the cyber team. So start with your identity and access management capabilities. You don't necessarily need to have a completely matured IAM program in place, but let's talk briefly about it. Identity is huge. It involves many cross-functional teams, from HR to applications to IT and security. Lots of people. Together with policies and processes or procedures, identity can certainly help with privilege misuse and errors. The idea is to grant users the right access to the right assets at the right time, and then just deny the rest. Oftentimes, the IAM program starts with identity data management, and that includes a source of truth for new employee onboarding. That source might be a human resources system. Next, that human resources system may feed a system that performs identity management, specifically user lifecycle management. In other words, the system where users are born, terminated, or modified. This process can be automated or it can be manual. As long as there's a vetted, documented process, it's good to go. Automation can come later if desired. Next, users need to be authenticated via access management. We talked about MFA earlier, which is part of access management. Directory services, single sign-on, or SSO, is also a part of access management. Then we have privileged access management, or PAM. That kicks up credential and session security for privileged administrative users and applications. Next, we've got access government, which addresses topics like role-based access control, or RBAC, segregation of duties, and access certification. Finally, there's data security and analytics, and that includes data classification and lifecycle, along with data loss prevention, or DLP. It's not for everyone. By the way, with the latest threats, it's more about the outsider threat than the insider threat. There's more going on with the outsiders than the insiders in terms of the breach report. So the outsider is where I would focus my attention for most businesses that decide to embark on a DLP journey from a risk-based perspective. IAM is a huge undertaking. But just start with the essentials like directory services, multi-factor authentication, and single sign-on, then privileged access management. Tackle the rest later if you decide to continue on your identity voyage. Everyone has firewalls, or at least they should anyway. Whether you run a firewall in hardware, software, a cloud, or a firewall as a service, consider investing in firewall subscriptions and features. Here's some examples. Turn on the identity or user features so you can see the user who was attacked when applicable, rather than just seeing an IP address. While you're at it, you should already be running application features so you can gain more traffic context than just simple ports and protocol. Consider turning on intrusion detection or prevention system, IDS-IPS, feature to tackle threats like spyware and vulnerability protection. It's no surprise that attackers like to hide their nefarious traffic within seemingly benign protocols like domain name system, DNS. Consider turning on a DNS security subscription. Now that can detect attackers using a DNS tunnel to encode non-DNS traffic within normal DNS queries and responses. Attackers may use this technique to exfiltrate data. Another detection example is the domain generation algorithm, or DGA detection. That happens when hosts reach out to command and control servers with domain names rapidly generated by the attacker's domain generation algorithms. The bad actors like to change the DNS names of their command and control servers, often to avoid detection. Finally, consider using the firewall vendor's malware protection and sandbox engine. And feel free to use alternative tools for some of these subscriptions if desired, especially if the firewall vendors do not offer these capabilities. Or, if you're so inclined, use the alternative tools to augment the subscriptions to achieve defense in depth. Don't forget to patch. Secure web gateways. That's nothing new per se, but turning on these web filters is essential to protect users from malicious web-based threats, whether they're known or unknown, and inappropriate websites in the workplace. Your firewalls might have that capability, or you can look at other avenues for the feature like SaaS providers and load balancers, or you can take it to the next level if you SSL decrypt, but that's another project in and of itself. And there's a lot of testing and troubleshooting involved. I mean, your certificates have to be perfect. If there's errors, it'll break. You have to do a lot of testing with browsers as well. You have to watch for what you decrypt as well. Like decrypting employee bank account and medical traffic is a no-go, for example. If you have a VPN in place, ensure it's integrated with multi-factor authentication. Now, ZTNA can replace your VPN and connect the right users to the right apps every time they need access. There are VPN vulnerabilities in the news lately, and one might think, oh, I should switch to ZTNA. But guess what? It's only a matter of time until ZTNA vulnerabilities make the news. Either way, you need to patch. Now, migrating from a VPN to a ZTNA solution is a big undertaking with the security team, the network group, and users. Consider knocking out the aforementioned essential tasks first before going down this road. In other words, build the foundational capabilities for email, identity, firewalls, and secure web gateways first. The implementation of advanced capabilities can be performed later. Finally, use a Cloud Access Security Broker, or CASB, to gain visibility in the cloud applications in use, sanctioned and unsanctioned. Block the high-risk applications if that's commensurate with your corporate security policy and culture. You could also consider doing something like blocking access to personal Dropboxes versus the corporate Dropbox, for example, if that aligns to your needs. But consider tackling the other SSE projects first that we've already talked about. I just wanted to touch on some other considerations for web security beyond SSE. For web applications, you can practice good application security development to include shifting left, meaning incorporating security early into the development cycle. Test your app statically and dynamically. But don't forget to include API security testing and open source code security testing. Use a WAF to protect against things like SQL injection attacks, for example, and other injection attacks. Finally, do some penetration testing and remediate the findings. Don't forget to patch. For traditional DDoS attacks and DNS DDoS attacks, use a product or service to mitigate those. Your ISP is a good place to start this journey, but there are other providers out there to explore as well. Okay, let's talk about the cloud. After all, the cloud providers are on the internet. Specifically, let's discuss cloud-native application protection platforms, or CNAPP, which is a Gartner term. So cloud-native applications, they're different than traditional apps. They run in a dynamic DevOps environment. Serverless computing can be used. Containers are used and orchestrated by Kubernetes. Apps are constantly being spun up and down. And there's a continuous integration, continuous delivery CI/CD pipeline going on. So modern apps need a more contemporary approach to application security, taking the workloads into account beyond just the apps themselves. Enter the CNAPP solution, which can perform some of the following. Cloud Security Posture Management, CSPM. So that's going to discover the assets, continually monitor posture, checking for compliance, threats, and data security. Scan the cloud container images for security. Scan infrastructure as code, or IAC, for application security. Then there's cloud infrastructure entitlement management. Make sure that identity and access management and permissions are secured. Cloud workload protection platform. Make sure that the hosts, the containers, and server lists are secured properly. You want to make sure you can scan for any vulnerabilities and scan the configurations for any misconfigurations. And it helps when the solution can propose fixes to these things. And then perform your regular application security testing, static, dynamic, software composition analysis, runtime application self-protection, and API protection. That's a lot of stuff going on in CNAPP. Well, that was a long one going through web security. Finally, let's talk about securing vertex number 3 of the cyber red triangle, which is the user endpoints. So we cannot go into battle with our endpoints unless we protect them first. They're the last line of defense. Endpoint solutions should use a combination of techniques to detect malicious threats on endpoints and protect them from harm. The solution should show the relevant forensic behavior on the endpoint, like a video camera recording all the action. This is great for incident response, to have a fully instrumented endpoint. By the way, consider getting an incident response retainer if you get ransomware or other breach. You'll have forensic experts at the ready to help. Now, forensic evidence can disappear over time, so it's critical that endpoint protection be covered on all endpoints, all servers, and all of the operating systems. Add additional endpoint protection software modules if you need it, like Identity for Active Directory or Hygiene, encryption, and there's a lot of other modules out there. So desktop sharing software can be vulnerable along with VPN software. That came out in the Threat Report 2024, Verizon data breach. Ensure the endpoints are patched properly for this type of software. In fact, I've seen desktop sharing software be deployed only when the help desk is about to actively work on a user's problem, and then it gets removed. That's a good way to support the business while reducing the attack service. By the way, it's a good idea for the computer admins to not use the same administrative password for each user's computer. I've seen so many penetration testers find this in client engagements over the past several years. Vulnerabilities, third-party, and brand protection touches everything in the cyber red triangle, so I have that right here. So vulnerability management isn't going away anytime soon. We talked about stolen credentials and phishing earlier, but malicious actors are still exploiting vulnerabilities. They need to be remediated, and patch management is key. It helps to use a tool to help you manage your endpoint assets and track your progress on vulnerabilities and patching. Don't forget the servers. Remember, the malicious actors may exploit a user endpoint and then move laterally to exploit the servers that have the trade secrets and other sensitive data. It's also important to patch the network devices and other infrastructure as well. Be sure you have full coverage and deployment of the vulnerability solution. It's nice to have a risk-based vulnerability management solution as well to help prioritize the findings, not just using CVE scores. So vulnerability management, nothing new. It's just like everyday hygiene in the cold and flu season. There's more you can do, but that's just the basics. And every day is cold and flu season in cybersecurity. Third-party risk management program is a good place to start, and you can do that in-house or you can outsource it to a service. You can let the service handle the third-party risk questionnaires. Consider using a GRC, Government Risk and Compliance tool, to house third-party data. And a GRC tool in general can be used for many other use cases as well. So if you're buying infrastructure and security products, ask about their secure development life cycle. And if you plan to buy many products from one vendor, make sure the vendor is squared away from an AppSec perspective and security in general. Or you might think about dividing up the load and using multiple vendors, but that doesn't always work. It's not always practical. Just think of ways to reduce the attack surface, maybe not install as much software as you need. Anyway, brand protection. So is your data on the dark web or the regular web? And it shouldn't be? Are there websites impersonating your business? Consider a brand protection monitoring service. Some services will even take down the malicious information on your behalf. I thought this might be a good idea for extortion when the malicious actors threaten to post your data that they stole. Even if you pay the extortion fee, do you trust these guys to honor your wishes and delete the data they stole and not post it? Probably not. After all, sometimes you cannot get your data back, even if you pay for the ransom encryption key. We've seen that happen. So, wrapping it up. So we've summarized the latest threats identified in the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report in 2024. We also discussed how to potentially address them. There's a lot more we can do, but for now, we need to move swiftly and stop the bleed before we can move on to other projects. There's no perfect solution, but a combination of the right people, processes, and technology can help us get back to basics and exercise due diligence. Before I sign off, I just want to leave you with one parting thought. If organizations can only execute one immediate action in cybersecurity, I would highly recommend that they get an incident response retainer. This way, if there is a major incident or breach, there will be knowledgeable people at the ready to respond right away. Do not delay. Do it today. Remember, forensic artifacts do not improve with age. They degrade. But do not stop with that one action. Just keep going, and most important of all, never quit. Thank you.